Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Direct Impact Podcast with Andrea Epting, and I'm so excited to be with you guys. We've got an amazing speaker in store for you. His name is Michael Alcee. He is a PhD and he's a clinical psychologist. He has a private practice in New York and he's a mental health educator at the Manhattan School of Music. And we are so excited to be with him today. We are going to be talking about what introverts, ambiverts, and highly sensitive people need to thrive mentally, emotionally, personally, relationally, professionally. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about Michael's book. He wrote a book called Therapeutic Improvisation. And this came out in 2022. So this year, and it's everywhere that books are sold. So welcome, Michael.
Great to be here. I'm looking forward to having a little conversation.
Same here. Yes, love it. And so one of the first questions, I just feel like our audience might have is, what are some of the differences between introverts and extroverts?
Yeah, it's so funny. We tend to think of it, like you said, our extroverts more social and our introverts more bookish. There's some truth to that, but a big part of it is how stimulated do you get? And introverts get very, very stimulated very, very quickly. And so those large group gatherings, those more outer oriented things can tire them and drain them out. Whereas an extrovert has a higher threshold and they actually prefer that stimulation, and that stimulation feels rewarding. So one man's treasure is another man's junk, right? Like, so one man's social stimulation feels great and energizing, and another one, it feels like it burns you out.
I love that. And when I have conversations with my clients, one of the things I say is kind of like what charges your batteries and what drains your batteries.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. I mean, if we know how to use our cell phones and think about that, and we know how many apps are running. So another way of thinking about it, for an introvert, they have probably more apps running because introverts tend to process a lot internally. And so the stuff that's coming around, like I have a client who lives in New York City, and he's definitely an introvert. And all of the stimuli, the noise of the subway, the noise of the neighbors, all of that stuff gets processed, and it takes out from all that energy.
Oh, that's very well put. And, I do, for instance, just personal, I consider myself to be more of an ambivert, but, because I love social settings on an intimate level, though. When it's all of the, walking in New York City, I feel like I do need more alone time or downtime or moments to recharge. Is that?
Yeah. And, you bring up a really good point, because we don't tend to focus on the ambiverts in culture. We tend to focus on the poles. Like, we're a culture that looks at binaries a lot.
You're right. Yeah.
Politically, whatever. And it turns out that I like to think of them as triplets, right? Like that there's an introvert, there's an ambivert, and there's an extrovert. And an ambivert is interesting because they have a little bit of both. Like, so they will like the social stimulation to a certain point or a certain kind, like one-on-one or small group. But after a certain amount of time, let's say an hour or two, they get tired and need to replenish by doing something more introvert centered. And then they can be as extroverted as the best extrovert. So I like to think of them as like the hybrids. Like, if you think of extroverts as gas-powered cars and introverts as electric cars, then the ambiverts are the hybrids of the personality set.
That's a great analogy. Hey, can I steal that one? I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So do you see any trends, because you do this work, you're in this more often. Do you see any trends between neurodivergence and neurotypicals when it comes to being more introverted, extroverted, or ambiverted?
That's a really good question. It's so hard because, when we look at this idea of neurodivergence, it's such a big umbrella. So neurodivergence can take in a lot of these different facets. And I think one of the interesting ways that's good about the term is that we're looking at people more individually. And I think one of the interesting things as well, the most important, I think, is that we're looking at what is a person's nature, what is sort of their temperament, what is their wiring, and what is the environment, and what's the optimal kind of combination and compatibility of those to make someone live their sort of best life.
Oh, I could not agree with you more. And I just feel like it's understanding our brains, understanding our chemistry, understanding how we work, how we thrive, and how we use our interests, right? And
Completely. And everybody has a really unique instruction manual, but there are a lot of like kind of common trends. So like it helps to
Mhm,
know if you're an
mhm,
introvert or an extrovert. It helps to know that you're a highly sensitive person. Like a highly sensitive person is someone who also, like an introvert, is very tuned in to what's going on around them. They could be tuned into light, they could sound, all of the above. They could be really perceptive and empathic, which many highly sensitive people are.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so learning about how to create healthy boundaries and also noticing how things are affecting you that might not affect the 70-80% of the population that isn't highly sensitive.
Yeah. How do the highly sensitive people and more introverted individuals who are more internal processors, how do they tend to approach their work?
Yeah, a lot of the like introverts are always looking at ways of trying to go inward to understand things and try to
Mhm.
piece them together. And highly sensitive people, because they're picking up on so much stuff, they're always trying to find forms. So I also think it's not surprising that a lot of artists and creators and creatives are highly sensitive people. Even engineers sometimes are like there can be people like who you wouldn't expect stereotypically that could be highly sensitive. Like I've worked with
Mhm.
highly sensitive engineers as well, because they're always kind of like trying to figure out things, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, put the puzzle together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, so where do you like where does creativity and like professional development intersect?
It's interesting because it's a combination. Like if you don't know like how you work best, it can affect you in relationships. It can affect you in terms of your own personal energy levels, but it also
Mhm.
can affect you at work, right? Like so I've met many wonderfully intelligent and capable introverts who would have challenges in meetings because meetings are very extrovert centric, right? They don't always,
Right.
it's not always about what's the best idea, it's about who
Mhm.
talks first. Same thing even with conventional education in America, right? It's sometimes not always who can kind of ponder things for a good 30 seconds, 45 seconds before they answer. So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And the other thing, it's really interesting to know about what are your energy levels so that you can be bringing your best self forward. Because what happens to somebody who's like, let's say, an introvert or an ambivert who has been overstimulated or sort of burnt out is that they will appear like I like to think of it like when you get hangry, you get crankier, you get crabbier, you get edgier, and people will feel that energy, and it really has nothing to do with the fact that that's a permanent feature. It's a temporary situational thing, just like hunger.
That's good.
So it's really helpful for you if you're an introvert or ambivert or highly sensitive person at the workplace to figure out, wait, when do my levels get too high and how can I take care of them? And, maybe it's not good for me to like schedule back to back big meetings if I can. Or maybe if I'm in a big meeting, maybe I could take myself out for a bathroom break or a walk break to recenter and come back. Or maybe even in the meeting, maybe I could be kind of like writing some notes and connecting to my inner voice a little bit more. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of just, I think, little tricks and strategies to stay tuned.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you help people identify those tricks and those strategies and help them implement them as well.
Yeah, and also looking for introvert like refuges and sanctuaries. Like where's the quietest places in the building, or where are the places where you could get a good walk in, like I said, so that you can recoup.
Right. Because we don't all have the nap pods like Google, right?
Exactly.
I
Yeah, we
want one of
don't. I
those.
know we don't always have that. It would be nice, and that's the other thing. It's funny because if you look like sometimes at office spaces like that, it was like the open concept thing, and then you like have these little pods, and it sort of shows you how highlighted what it actually looks like to live in a largely extroverted world.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me this. You mentioned polarization. And
Mhm.
we see it every day, and it just seems to have accelerated drastically in this country. Um, and also perfectionism. I
Yeah.
would like for the audience to understand a little bit more about how perfectionism really stifles our creativity and our ability to, grow and learn.
Yeah, they're actually sort of two sides of the same coin, perfectionism and polarization. They're both sort of ways that we try to deal with trying to be more fully in control of something
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and also trying to believe in the illusion of our own omnipotence, right? Like,
Right.
it's not easy being human, and it's not easy to recognize that there are multiple dimensions and complex dimensions. And I think sometimes we go to these shortcuts because it eliminates some of the anxiety and the
Sure.
stress of making it very clear. I'm either a clear winner or a clear loser, or you're either a clear winner or a clear loser. The problem is there's this really interesting book that I'm reading. I can't remember the author's name. It's called Both End Thinking. And it's all about like really engaging paradox, but instead of going for the either or,
Mm-hmm.
trying to see the both end. How can I look at these challenges and these complex issues and not just settle on one or the other? There might be some aspects of truth here and some aspects of truth there. It takes a lot more emotional, intellectual sophistication to stay through that process.
Mm.
But I think perfectionism and polarization sometimes makes us feel more powerful. Just how sometimes, if we get angry about something, it makes us feel more powerful, even though there are other more complex emotions usually underneath anger. And also, when we get to polarization and perfectionism, there's underlying fear or hurt lurking around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As if, wait, I should only be this thing, or the world should only be this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's hard for all of us to stay with the fact that it's not only this one thing.
Absolutely. And when we're experiencing a great deal of toxic stress, or we haven't really reprocessed our traumas and our hurts and our wounds, I feel like we do have that tendency in dis-ease, in a state of dis-ease, to have everything be black and white, all or nothing, always and never, because that's easier to navigate in those times.
And you bring up a really good point that I want to kind of give people some compassion for and give yourself some self empathy here, is that we're actually built in a sort of survival way. When push comes to shove, when things are hitting our trauma places, and notice when we talk about political polarization, often it centers around something that's either an individual trauma or even a collective trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There's never neutral stuff. It's not like, wait, what do you think about like sunny weather? Like it's nothing like bland like that. It usually hits on something more loaded.
Uh-huh.
And we are built in a healthy way to go to fight, flight, when to go to those survival mechanisms. And part of that survival mechanism is also to cut off other things.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked about creativity. Well, if you think about it, dissociation, right, is what we call diabolical. It cuts, it throws, it tears apart, is where the root of diabolical comes. And what's the opposite of diabolical? One of my mentors taught me this, is symbolic,
Mm.
which is to throw together, and which is creativity. And creativity is not just about tearing something apart, it's about finding ways of making connection between seemingly different things.
Yeah. And I think it was John Bradshaw, or at least he talked about this in his, when he was doing his talks on healing the shame that binds you. He said, as soon as you think you know the answer, you've killed your creativity.
Yeah, because you need to have a child's mind, or sort of beginner's mind.
Uh-huh.
And that's the other paradox of being human. I think we forget, in order to be, and this is really important for those of us who are like in our 20s, and 30s even, or even teenagers as well, is like we want to grow up so bad and we want to feel capable. But it's also important to remember that the most fully grown up person is integrated between their child selves and their adult selves.
That's
And
right.
when they're working and collaborating, you have the best of what I'd call an expert's mind and a child's mind.
Mm,
And if
that's
you
well
look at
put.
some of the great like innovators, engineers, doctors, musicians, artists, you could see the integration of those sides, and it's a more sophisticated. And I think sometimes perfectionism makes us feel like I want to grow out of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you grow out of your humanity?
Right.
And why should we also forget others' humanity in our dialogue? By the way, so when we're
Mm.
talking about polarization, my advice is instead of staying with the hate, instead of following the hate, follow the hurt.
Mm.
Look for
Mm-hmm.
the hurt. That is where the nuance and dimension is going to be, on their side and on your side.
Mm. And I couldn't agree more. I also feel like one of the things that's worked for me and I recommend for others is when I notice my hurt or my anger coming to the surface when I'm um, engaging, somebody else in their opinion, I try to respond with just curiosity and just
Yeah.
asking more questions and really showing up with an open mind, because at the end of that, the anger really subsides and it's like, wow, that was about me, not about their opinion. That was an old hurt.
Yeah, and creativity thrives in safe surprise, enjoyable surprise.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why we like a good joke, is because a good joke surprises us. And that's what makes comedy so powerful. And that's also what makes novels so powerful. It's like we
Hmm.
don't know where this character is going to go. And that mystery, that excitement about discovering something new has us in. And so, but we also have to recognize that there's some times that we don't really want to be surprised, and it scares us. It scares us, and it makes us
Hmm.
feel like, no, no, I want to be in total control of where this is going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of takes me to my next question. And, I love to ask mental health professionals this question of, what cultural shifts would we like to see, what we'd like to see implemented in order to really address this epidemic of anxiety and fear, polarization and depression?
I think it's really helpful for us to learn how to know and use our own operating system. To kind of use an analogy, it's like I think sometimes we lament the fact that the psyche is so sophisticated, but that's what makes us so interesting. And I think sometimes even the anxiety that we notice in folks and depression, it's completely understandable. I just think it's really also important that we don't pathologize ourselves too much and recognize that the anxiety and depression are the result of these natural tensions and conflicts that come with trying to be more fully dimensional as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm really glad that we've destigmatized the sense of feeling comfortable talking about what's happening inside, going for counseling, I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. I think it's also important that we don't over identify. In other words, like even like
Mm-hmm.
post-pandemic, like people are like, is it more anxiety? Are there more anxious people out there? Well, yes, but it's also we've had these strange, challenging, adverse, almost pathological conditions. So I don't know if it's anxiety. I think it's also the fact that we're trying to creatively master tensions and conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the way people talk about this stuff also of not getting so black and white, is it in me? Am I anxious? Or is the world anxiety provoking? I think we want to kind of look at this as always as sort of back and forth. And by allowing to see that,
Mm-hmm.
and also the fact that there's light inside the dark, there's possibility in terms of anxiety, there's possibility in terms, like Carl Jung said, any neurotic condition like anxiety or depression was already the beginning of the creative growth. So I just sometimes think it's a really positive thing that we've been able to talk about these issues, but I don't like to one-dimensionalize them as problems.
Yeah. And so some of the things I heard you say in that was, as far as what cultural shifts could there be, is I heard in there some compassion for self, compassion for others, and really diving into relationship with ourselves and how
Yeah.
we experience the world around us and others. So compassion, relationship, tolerance, all of those things.
Yeah, and also
Hmm.
I think like you're suggesting too is that to see, I think one of my big missions is to help people out there, but also therapists see that to be fully human is a creative venture. And sometimes we conventionally think of creativity as, oh, did I make a painting or write a symphony? And I think it's true, that's a wonderful aspect of our creativity as human beings, but I think actually psychologically tuning in and working with these things is a creative act. And I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for how miraculous and wonderful that is. And I think when we look at it from that standpoint, you don't see yourself as, oh, I just have this anxiety, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
did
Hmm.
Picasso say, "Oh, I feel like I'm painting anxiety"? No, he figures out like, what am I doing with the feelings that I'm experiencing and noticing what's happening in the world, and how can I represent them? How can I express them? How can I
Right.
contain them?
Hmm.
And to me, that's a much more interesting question. And it has like, it does everything that you said. It allows us to have self-compassion. It allows us to connect more fully with others and our environment. And to me, that's a
Yeah.
much greater human goal.
Yeah. And the other thing I just heard you say was safety and expression.
Yeah.
Safety and expression is just a huge thing that I feel like is missing right now.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's key. And our ability to, whether it's painting through, and showing, expressing emotion through that, or if it's just feeling safe with a coworker.
Yeah.
I feel like that's missing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's so funny too that you kind of highlight is we talk a lot about the importance of inclusivity and diversity in our culture and sort of multicultural appreciation. And I think as much as we are doing that on the outside, which is like you said, also welcoming these different things,
Yeah.
I think we also want to think about diversity from the inside out. That we
Yes.
have this tremendous diversity inside of us in these different aspects of ourselves. Like Walt Whitman said, "I'm large, I contain multitudes." We contain multitudes, and it's important learning how to honor and contain and express those multitudes.
Mm, very well put. Yeah. Thank you so much. Um, is there a call to action that you might have for our listeners, who really want to find a safe expression and a way to be creative and, you know, in all aspects of life, whether it's personally or professionally? Like, what's the call to action for them?
I mean, the call to action is for for artists, one, to recognize that your art doesn't just happen in your work. Whether you're an actor or a musician or a painter, that your art also happens in here.
Mm,
And for those who are non-artists, who don't even think of them having an artistic bone in their body, being human and relating to this stuff is an artistic act. And so
yeah.
my call to action is to see the fullness of our creative capacities
Right.
in, and that's why I jokingly, half jokingly describe it as what I teach therapists in the book that I wrote is about how to read the changes like a jazz musician, that helping people learn how to read the chord changes of their lives and listen for the music within what seems like noise is the art.
Yeah.
And I think we're all reading the changes. We're all trying to read the changes and trying to make something out of them. And so
Mm,
I think my call to action is to inspire people to see that rather than to feel like, oh my God, I'm just bombarded by the changes.
right. Right. I love that. Thank you so much. Could you tell us just a little bit more about therapeutic improvisation and professional development? Because I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, about the book and
Yeah.
about the concepts behind it.
Yeah, so it's sort of inspired because I work at Manhattan School of Music. So I work with, these musicians and artists, and I
A lot of
noticed
talent
this
around you.
a lot of talent. And I thought, we in the field of therapy, as you know, Andrea, like we consider this an art, but a lot of it is a science as well. And I found that we individually to ourselves, we think this is artistic, but we don't share it as a group. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we can have a book that showcases what an art it is, but it's grounded in the science? So
Hmm.
it's a neuroscience-y relationship therapy oriented book, which is like every therapist needs to develop their voice, their distinctive signature voice, just like an artist. And by doing that, we help to summon and conjure the artistic voice in our clients. And this is something that cuts across different theories, different interventions, but it's something that we're all working on. And so I wrote this book for both my graduate self, graduate students like me,
Mhm.
early career clinicians, and even veteran therapists, to say, like, this is what we do.
Yeah.
And to sort of take pride in that, and to celebrate the joy and the richness of what we bring. And I thought, having that, here, I'll show you a picture. I had them do a jazzy cover.
Oh
So,
yeah. Look at that. I love that.
because I wanted to showcase how dynamic and colorful the psyche is, and how what we're working with is really, really wonderful.
Mhm.
So I hope it kind of adds something to the mix and the dialogue about what it is to be a therapist, but also what it is to be a creative self.
Right. And it is my hope that you and I, as psychotherapists, are modeling that today, right now. Like, this is a creative outlet. The opportunity for me to
Mhm.
have this podcast and to create content is a creative outlet for me that I did not have 2 years ago. And you're right. You wrote a book. That's a creative outlet. I mean, so I feel like, I've got some pride right now because I feel like we're modeling that to other professionals.
And I think what's great about that too
Hmm.
is that I think we always want to be doing that.
Hmm.
No
Hmm.
matter what our field is, we always want to be finding a way to connect to that creative place. And that's
That's
where
right.
the energy is, that's where the joy is, that's where the fulfillment is.
Mm,
So yeah,
absolutely.
it's great stuff.
Yeah. Well, Michael Alcee, thank you so much. Today, you have made a direct impact.